Huh. So those are interesting starter choices. I mean, I guess there's absolutely nothing saying that they couldn't choose 2 of the 3 starters from the same region, but still unexpected nonetheless.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
We're taking a little break from the Pokepaint train this week to tackle the topical news of the Pokemon Presents from a few weeks ago. Specifically, I will be predicting the starter Pokemon evolutions for the Pokemon Z-A starters Chikorita, Tepig, and Totodile. First off, will there even be alternate evolutions? Well, maybe. At first glance, yes, because the last game had them, but I would actually bet that there won't be any. What makes me say this is that from a lore perspective, they would make even less sense, as Z-A takes place in the near future when Lumiose City will be going through some sort of urban redevelopment plan. It seems like not a lot of logistical wiggle room for alternate evolutions, although admittedly that's never stopped the Pokemon Company before. If anything, I think these starters will probably receive Mega Evolutions, which would only make sense as Mega Evolutions are getting a comeback in this game, which does make me really excited, but even with that said, I will be making alternate evolutions today. But if you really think about it, the starters should be Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie, as these are the modern-day Kalos starters. Although this does pose a neat thought exercise about the Pokemon world. Having new starters in the near future suggests that starter options may not be standardized in each region, suggesting that maybe Chespin, Froakie, and Fennekin were starters in the past, and this would maybe explain why Professor Sycamore had Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle as the second starter choice in the X and Y games. Maybe that was the new batch of standard starter evolutions starting in 2013, or whenever those games were supposed to take place. It's an interesting idea, if anything else. Another interesting note is that these were my personal starter predictions for the game. Snivy and Piplup are obviously wrong, but it's interesting that although I may have not gotten the correct Crocodile starter, they still chose one. This is apparently for different reasons, though. Totodile references the urban legend of crocodiles in city sewers, but when I stuck Fuecoco in there, it was to reference Spain being nearby. This, to explain a little further, was because my concept for a Kalos-based Legends game would be that it would have taken place in medieval times, which would have been perfect for Kalos, but a little bit too expected, which is probably why they didn't go with that idea. Anyway, that's a tangent for another video, or series of videos, maybe? Anyway, today we predict the possible alternate evolutions for the Legends Z-A starters Chikorita, Tepig, and Totodile. When coming up with designs for each of them, I try to relate them each to Paris and their concepts, as Lumiose is the Pokemon stand-in for Paris. The first design that I came up with was Emboar's, so I'm just gonna do them in the order that I made them. This design was probably the most stream of thought design that I did for the 3. There's a strong association I have, like many others I'm sure, of Paris with food. In trying to find a pig-related food, I immediately thought of pigs in a blanket, mostly because I thought I could make a fun design based on the literal interpretation of the name. The idea that I had was a sleepy Emboar wrapped in a cloak or a blanket of fur, who instead of using its raw strength like the Unova fighting type variant, it would be a psychic type. Because psychic seems sleepy to me. I don't know. I might be the only one that thinks that. Since the upper part of the fur cape took on the form of the fire necklace that the original had, I decided to have it breathe a psychically controlled swirl of fire out of its nose that would visually reference something like a nose bubble on a sleeping character. I angled the ears down to give it a more subdued appearance, and gave him an almost yawning expression. I made sure its pose seemed far more relaxed than the original, with slouched shoulders and hanging limbs. I changed the colors around to get a darker and more pink and purple hued palette, and boom, I had my first design. Lumiose Emboar, the Mana Pig Pokemon and the evolved form of Pignite. When a Pignite evolves into Emboar in Lumiose City in the Kalos region, they have recently been observed to take this form. Unlike in other regions where the Emboar are fiery and lively, the Emboar here are sluggish. They nap for the majority of the day and they wrap themselves in their blanket of fur to keep warm. They only wake up to look for food. The brain waves that form from their intense sleep patterns allow them to control their fire telekinetically. I had the easiest time coming up with Feraligatr's concept out of the three, even though it came after Emboar's. But it was definitely the most challenging for me to draw. After a bit of research, I found that the alligators living in sewers urban legend actually comes from a real event in Paris, where an illegal and discarded pet alligator was found in the river near a sewage drain. So, since a sewer croc seemed the main inspiration for adding Totodile in the first place, I thought letting it be the main influence for the final form just made the most sense. Quickly, I found that this idea was easier said than done, as I had a hard time coming up with the visuals that reflected that idea. In the end, the main thing I did was give it a dark body pattern that suggested a layer of sediment or sludge on top of its body, as if it were laying in gross sewage waters and letting the waste pile up. I know, gross idea, but hey, sewers are gross. But to make it a little less disgusting, I made the pattern a bit vague as to what it was trying to mimic. The other thing I did was give Feraligatr big spines that are reminiscent of the intimidating and often toxic spines on types of poisonous creatures and fish. I also made it generally meaner looking, with a crouched pose and narrow eyes, but less in the brute force gator kind of mean way and more in the conniving, more malicious intent mean way that many other poison types have. I shifted the colors to make it a more sickly green shade, and that was my final change. Lumiosian Feraligatr, the toxic jaw Pokemon, and the evolved form of Croconaw. There was a legend once that Feraligatrs lived in the sewers of Lumiose City, and up until recently, that story has been thought to only be an old wives' tale. Now, however, it has been discovered that when Croconaw evolve into Feraligatr in Lumiose City, they often take on this alternate form. Their bodies have adapted to live in the sludge and the toxic fumes of the sewers, so that they adapt their poisons to be stored in their teeth and the spines on their back and limbs. Though in other regions Feraligatr are more brutal fighters that rely on their raw strength, the Feraligatrs here prefer to inflict their foes with crippling poison, weakening them before attack. Don't, however, be led to believe that the Feraligatrs here are any less formidable. Now, the concept that took me the longest to come up with was the one for Meganium. I definitely wanted to give it a more aggressive physical attack-focused edge when compared to the others. I know the common consensus is that it will be Fairy-type because of Chikorita's new moves, but I feel like this would be a more unique concept. I had the idea of making it a Steel-type that had something to do with cooking. One, because the whole Paris and food thing, but also because of the way that its pre-evolution references bay leaves in its name. The idea I went with was replacing its antenna with leaves similar to Chikorita's and bay leaves, and having them act like sharp kitchen knives. The idea did make it into the final design, but it took a bit of a backseat when I started drawing. While designing, the ideas changed based on what I was trying out, and I started to play around with the idea that the flower that would grow out of its neck would be a rose, as such it would have the sharp thorns growing out of its body to further reference the Steel type. This rose and thorns idea was inspired by the idea that Paris is a romantic city and roses are a symbol of romance. So the flower around the base of its neck ended up being a rose, and I gave it thorns going up its neck to sort of reference that idea that roses have thorns on their stems. Lumiosian Meganium, the rose thorn Pokemon and the evolved form of Bayleaf. When a Bayleaf evolves into Meganium in some parts of the Kalos region, they have been said to take on this alternate form. They are a symbol of romance in Lumiose City, as the scent that comes from the flower on their neck is used in perfumes and pleasant fragrances. It is noted, however, that this pleasant element comes with a dangerous side. Bristling thorns grow out of the scales on their back and neck, and if any would dare to pick a petal without permission, they would be jabbed with needle-thin barbs or slashed at with the leaves on its head, which are harder and sharper than kitchen knives. They are proud and stubborn, but fierce, and loyal to those which it befriends. So here are my alternate final forms for the starter Pokemon for Legends Z-A. Do I think they'll be an accurate prediction? No, not in the slightest. I do think that it makes way more sense for them to go with Mega Evolutions. For many reasons, Megas started in Kalos. The alternate evolutions make very little sense in the lore, and we know that they're bringing back Mega Evolutions anyway. But still, I thought it would be a fun exercise to imagine them as the alternate forms, like what we got in the Legends game. And who knows, maybe they won't get Mega Evolutions. The original starters from X and Y didn't get them, and maybe we'll see Megas on Chespin, Froakie, and Fennekin, which that might make a neat video. But if I do tackle that concept, I'll do that closer to the release date. But whether I'm close or incredibly far off the mark, only time will tell. In the meantime, tell me what you think. Do you think they'll be close? Which one is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. We've been doing nothing but Pokemon for the last 4 videos, so next time I promise you'll get something different. Whether or not that will be History of the Future or something a little more experimental is anyone's guess, as I'm working on 2 videos at the moment. And it's really whichever one I get done first. Either way, no Pokepaint next week, but I will be working on the last part of the redesigns video very, very soon. But as always, a special thanks to my patrons who are appearing on screen now and support the channel by making projects like this possible. If you would like to join them in their support, you can do so at the link in the description for as little as $3 a month. Thank you to all my patrons, and as always, thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, then leave a like, and if you want to see other videos like it, then subscribe, and turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.